Blog Talk Radio.
And today we hopefully are going to deliver some analysis and expose a lot of, whatever we want to call it, truth versus fiction and where we're going with this whole crisis. My guest is a good friend and an amazing mind, and I call him a visionary and has a view of the world that I think are so necessary at the time. It's Francis Culkin, and the name of this program is COVID and the World in Crisis. Brian is a writer, theorist, and film director. He has written extensively about topics ranging from contemporary urban gentrification to the history of boxing, the presidency of Donald Trump, to an analysis of 21st century global capitalism. Heroin addiction in modern American society, to the cultural development of Boston, Massachusetts, the ideology of neoliberal globalization to Amazonian plant medicine. His books include The Meaning of Trump, Postscript on Boxing, There Is No Such Thing as Boston, Conversations on Gentrification, on Heroin, Spontaneous Reflections, Hypermodernity and the End of the World, The Brian Francis Culkin Reader, Boxing and Cinema, Bread, a Play, and his forthcoming first novel, Into the Jungle.
No, COVID, I mean, there's a lot of information going on right now in the world that there's battle royal of different information regarding COVID, and there are people who think it's a hoax, I guess you could say, and there are people who really think that it's actually a non-existent virus, and there are people who, when they call it a hoax, they're referring to the government response, or they're referring to its level of potential lethality. So there's a whole spectrum of how people are responding to this. But for me, I mean, there's no doubt that COVID is a fact, and it's certainly a fact. And there can be absolutely no doubt about that. And, I'm not simply referring to the reality of its biological implications, the fact that it can be deadly. And, of course, there's plenty of data, and there's plenty of stories that tell us that for many people, healthy people, young people, it's just a bad flu or even a mild flu. And then, of course, on the other side of things, regarding whether it's a hoax or whether it's a fact, you have the question of the virus's origin. Is it a product of an organic biological process? There's actually a really good scene at the end of the film Contagion, the Steven Soderbergh film, when we see like this kind of montage of how a virus can theoretically pass from an animal host to a single human being and then all of a sudden become a global pandemic. If you haven't seen that film or the end of that film, it's really interesting because you get this really clear visual representation of how a virus can go from, in this case, a bat to a global pandemic. And then the other part of it is did it originate in a Chinese laboratory? And even that option, the man-made option, is itself split in two, because you have the question of whether or not it was intentionally released by the Chinese government to cause global economic havoc, kind of a form of biological covert warfare against America, or is it simply an accident by a clumsy lab worker in Wuhan? So to me, these questions are interesting, like whether it's a real virus, whether it's not, whether it's deadly, whether it's not. When being asked the big question, is this serious? And to me, it's absolutely serious. And the reason why it's serious is because the world has changed because of it. So whether or not it's not as strong as people say it is, or whether it came from a lab in Wuhan or developed organically, the fact of the matter is the texture, the rhythm of our day-to-day lives, global supply chains, public healthcare systems, mental health, and I think most obviously is just the texture of our collective. I mean, you go to a supermarket now and see everyone with a mask. I mean, that's a remarkable thing that you probably couldn't have imagined in February. So that's what I would say about that.
You know, and you and I totally agree that, you know, I find that, you know, our minds sync on so many things, and that's where I am with it. You know, I got the different the different theories and mindsets on all of this. I finally had to turn it all off and just tell people, look, no matter what it is, I came to the same conclusion that you just expressed. It is, you know, and as you and I know, in dealing with our own personal development, any spiritually attuned individual, that's the first thing you have to look at. You have to be mindful and say, it is, no matter what the causes of the theories, it has changed everything. So where do I fit into that scheme? You know, what do I do to stay sane? Where do I organize my life story? And where do I move on? And hopefully that's what we can talk about today. I think
that would be good. And, you know, I just one of the interesting things, because you mentioned something about spirituality and kind of accepting the situation and looking at it where it is. But one of the really interesting things that I've noticed, at least, and this is just kind of my own kind of armchair analysis of online culture, is that some of those vocal people who are questioning the veracity of COVID are coming from the spiritual community, interestingly enough. I mean, it's very weird. You have this kind of convergence of, you know, Los Angeles yoga teachers and a Republican senator from Arkansas like Tom Cotton, who are basically saying the same thing. To their point, I mean, there are elements of that critique that I'm sympathetic to. I mean, but at the same time, that's not really what interests me. Yes, I'm interested, of course, in the implications of COVID or the lack of implications. But what interests me personally is how this pandemic is functioning symbolically, how it's transforming the symbolic landscape of our social, political, and economic landscape, and how the individual human being is dealing with that symbolic mutation. Like what happened with George Floyd in the context of a pandemic was so revealing to so many things about American society. It was incredible. So at least from an intellectual standpoint, that's the way I would look at it, more so than trying to get into the specific biological ramifications or its origin story, for lack of a better term. One of the things that this community has mentioned that I would tend to agree with is that COVID is being used, I guess I would say intentionally maybe, by certain players or forces within the global economy, within certain state apparatuses to generate power, generate control, and really to amplify human misery, I think. And to that point, I would agree, because when this first hit, as you know, I live in South America, in Peru, and I was down there for the first 2 months. I got back to America. They just reopened the border starting in October, so I'm looking forward to going back. So I've been in America now for 3 months. I mean, it was so scary, and not only was the government response militaristic and extraordinary. I mean, people in America have no idea. It's not even remotely comparable. But also the viciousness of the virus. I mean, it was just going through the city of Iquitos, where I live, like a knife through butter, and so many people were getting sick. And you're looking on the internet, and people in America saying, it's a hoax, it's fine, no big deal. If you live in a country like America, probably the wealthiest country in the world, and you know, many of these people live in suburban housing, or they live in the country, or you know, people that live in cities. Even the cities in America are much less dense than a city in Latin America. And when you don't have that capacity to naturally social distance, the fact of the matter is COVID, it will spread, and it will spread violently. And the reason why I know that is because I saw it with my own 2 eyes. I lived in that for 2 months, and it was very, very sad what I was seeing. It was very painful, and it caused a tremendous amount of human suffering, not just from the economic or social implications, but from the actual being sick. You know, from being sick, being sick in bed and for 2 weeks and having trouble breathing. So yeah, that's kind of what I would expand on that about the spiritual perspective.
Did you actually have COVID?
No, I never did. But I probably it literally felt like to me in Aikidos that 1 out of every 3 people had it. Everybody either had it, their mother had it. It was literal. Home, only one person, actually 2 people in my immediate family, and my extended family have got it, and I have a pretty big extended family. Whereas in Aikido, it wasn't at all. It was like every other person had it. I mean, it was just ripping through, and also too, go to the hospital, so they're just staying at home and just kind of fighting it out themselves, because the medical infrastructure in a country like Peru is certainly not equipped to handle a pandemic. I never got it, and I don't ascribe that to anything but luck. I mean, yes, I take care of myself. Yes, I eat well. Yes, I exercise. Yes, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, yes, that might help. Sure. I mean, sure, you want to be healthy no matter what. But I mean, I don't know why I didn't get it, to be honest with you, because I was over the market every morning in Peru, and everyone else was there, and they were getting it. So that's where I would get my vegetables and my fruit for the day. Yeah,
well, I think you've hit the point. Is that when I get a little uncomfortable with, again, the whole hoax idea, it doesn't exist, it's just the flu, blah blah blah, and then you see it, and I recently read the book Mayflower, which was the account of the Pilgrims coming.
Oh, I read that book by Nathaniel Philbrick.
Yeah,
by Philbrick.
And remember
I read that book.
Right. Yeah, remember the part.
I read it a long time ago, so I don't remember it too well. I read it 10 years ago.
There was right. Well, anyway, there's a part where the pilgrims are walking through sections of the New World, and they're just finding human bones everywhere, and they started to figure out that the Europeans who had come here before them, and they were there before them, brought smallpox, brought their own diseases that the Indians were, Native Americans were not immune to and had no resistance to, and it just wiped out entire tribes.
You're talking about some of the random fishermen that had come before and not actually set up a settlement. Yeah. Right. I do remember that part.
Right, and those diseases were real, but they destroyed entire tribes of people, and there were so many bones because the survivors couldn't even have the time to bury them. So pandemics are real, folks. The Spanish flu, etc. They are real, and so we can't ignore that fact, and to think that this is. But moving on, and I'm right with you on the intellectual, societal, and ramifications, and the. I love what you just said. The something about enhancing the human misery. That's what's fascinating me is seeing how the people are taking this, and we're just seeing people becoming more and more miserable, whether it's physically or mentally, especially. Can I read your post today?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that yes, there is a exponential rise in, for the lack of a better word, misery across the planet. But this is happening in impoverished countries where the misery is a material misery, where people don't have clean water, or the supply chains have been broken to the point where there's food shortages. And then in America, you don't quite have that yet. But there is an emotional or spiritual misery that you can really sense in America right now. It's a palpable feeling. You certainly saw that with the outburst that happened this summer, but you also feel the way American life has become.